I unlocked the front door with a tired sigh after a long week at work. All I wanted was to go up to the attic and pull out one of my old sketchbooks. Drawing always helped me calm down. I climbed the stairs, pushed open the attic door, and froze. The room was empty. Completely empty. Every childhood box I had stacked, labeled, and guarded for years was gone. At first I thought my parents moved things around, so I checked the corners, then the closet, then even under the loose floorboard. Nothing. A tight pain grew in my chest. I ran downstairs and found them in the living room. They looked up calmly when I asked what happened. My mother shrugged and said they finally cleared out all my childish clutter. My father added that they already sent everything to the dump. My voice cracked when I asked why they would do that without asking me. They told me to stop being dramatic. I felt something inside me break. I rushed into the garage and began digging through every bin. My eyes were blurry with tears, but then I saw it. A plain white envelope with my name on it was wedged behind a trash bin. I picked it up with shaking hands. My parents walked in and fell silent when they saw my face. I held the envelope like it might break apart in my hands. My parents were still standing there, watching me with strange expressions. I needed to breathe, so I slipped the envelope into my bag and walked outside. I sat on the steps and tried to settle my thoughts. Those boxes were not just paper and old toys. They were the only pieces of my life that still felt like mine. I kept medals from school, letters from camp, and small art projects I made during weekends. I even had a journal filled with thoughts I never dared to say out loud. When my parents were strict or controlling, those pages helped me stay steady. My parents always said that nothing before college mattered. They said childhood was a list of silly moments that should be forgotten. Those boxes were the one thing I refused to let them control. Now they were gone. They had erased the version of me I had built in secret. I looked toward the envelope again. My parents had gone back inside, but their tense faces stayed in my mind. They were worried about the envelope. That alone made me decide not to open it in front of them. I stood up, walked to my room, and promised myself I would read it alone. I waited until late that night before opening the envelope. My hands were still shaking a little. I sat on my bed, closed the door, and tore the flap open. Inside was a small packet of papers. The first page was a letter from a law office. It congratulated me on a trust fund created in my name when I was a child. My breath caught. I read the next page. It listed a large balance meant to help with education and the start of adult life. My parents had never said a single word about this. Not during our many late-night arguments about money. Not when they said I could not afford therapy. Not when they told me to give up art programs because they were too expensive. The last page confused me. The information cut off as if a page had been removed. I tapped the edges and saw a slight tear where something had been ripped out. My heart thudded hard. Something was missing. Someone had removed it on purpose. A soft floorboard creaked right outside my room. I whispered to myself, asking what else they hid from me. Then I folded the papers carefully and slipped them back into the envelope. I sat still, listening to the quiet house and wondering what I had just stepped into. In the morning, I walked to the kitchen with the envelope in my hand. My parents were eating breakfast. I placed the letter on the table and asked what it was. My mother laughed too loudly and said it was an old thing that fell through. My father said the money never came because of bad investments. When I pressed them, they switched stories again and again. Every time I tried to ask something clear, they said I was being ungrateful. They talked about all their sacrifices and how I never appreciated them. Their smiles looked forced. Their voices were too sharp. I knew they were lying. When I mentioned that the letter listed the current balance and the name of the attorney, my father snapped. He told me to stop digging into things I did not understand and to focus on my job instead of old papers. I folded the letter and said I would call the law office myself. My parents stared at me, eyes wide. Their fear was clear now. Something about this trust fund was more serious than they wanted me to know. I picked up my bag and walked out the door, hearing my mother whisper something worried behind me. During my lunch break, I sat in my car and called the law office. My voice shook as I gave my name. The assistant on the phone gasped softly and said the attorney had tried to reach me for years. She said someone always told the office that I was not available. I gripped the steering wheel as she spoke. She confirmed that the trust fund existed. She said the money was never lost. Then she told me something that made my stomach twist. The official guardian on the account was my father. She said there were withdrawal records starting when I was 17. My breath felt thin. I remembered my parents telling me we could not afford new clothes or school activities. They told me money was tight. They even cried about not being able to help with college. Then the assistant asked if I wanted a full statement sent to my own email. I said yes. When the call ended, I stared at my reflection in the windshield. My face looked pale. I finally understood what had happened. A notification appeared on my phone. The first email from the law office had arrived. I opened it with trembling hands, knowing my world was about to change. I opened the statement on my laptop and scrolled slowly. There were rows and rows of withdrawals. Some were small but regular. Others were large amounts. The notes beside them said things like house improvements and family emergencies and education costs. None of them matched what I remembered from those years. I saw dates when I had begged for new shoes and was told there was no money. I saw dates when I wanted to join an art program and my parents said it was impossible. While they lectured me about being responsible, they were taking money from an account I never knew existed. Then I saw a single very large transfer to an account name I did not recognize. My skin prickled. I felt as if I was reading a secret life written in numbers. My anger rose so fast I had to close the laptop for a moment. Part of me wanted to run back home and scream at them. But another part of me remembered how they twisted every argument until I looked like the problem. I reopened the laptop and forwarded everything to a private email address. Then I printed several copies and hid them in my car. I told myself I would not explode without a plan. I would build a case. I knew I needed more than numbers. I needed someone who remembered what my grandparents wanted. So that weekend I drove across town to visit my late grandmother's sister, Aunt Rosa. Her small house smelled like jasmine tea and old books. She smiled when she saw me, but her eyes also looked curious. We sat at her round table. I tried to sound casual as I asked if my grandparents had ever talked about leaving something for me. Aunt Rosa set her cup down and frowned a little. She said of course they had. She said everyone in the family knew I was the grandchild who would receive a special fund. According to her, my grandparents worried about how strict my parents were with me. They said the money was meant to give me freedom. It was supposed to help me choose my own life when I was old enough. I felt tears sting my eyes. All this time I thought no one had seen what I went through at home. But my grandparents had. And they tried to give me a door out. Aunt Rosa tilted her head and said she always assumed I used the money to move out or travel. I shook my head. She fell quiet and said there was something else I needed to see. Aunt Rosa stood up and walked slowly to her bedroom. I heard drawers open and close. After a few minutes, she came back holding a thin envelope that had turned soft at the edges with time. She sat down and slid it toward me. Inside was a single sheet of paper. At the top was the law office letterhead. At the bottom was a section I had not seen before. It explained that any large withdrawal from the trust fund after I turned 18 needed my written consent along with my guardians. Under that line were 3 signatures. One was my father's name. One was my mother's. The last was supposed to be mine. But the handwriting was wrong. The letters were shaped strangely. The curve of the Y was different. I knew at once that I had never signed that page. My throat felt tight. I handed the paper back to Aunt Rosa and asked where she got it. She said my mother had brought it to her years ago in a panic. She begged Aunt Rosa to destroy it, calling it a misprint that could cause legal trouble. Aunt Rosa had not destroyed it. She kept it hidden. Now it sat on the table between us like a bright piece of truth. Driving home, my mind raced. I now had the bank records, the trust letter, and proof that someone had forged my name. Part of me still hoped there was some strange mistake. But when I walked into the house and saw my parents sitting in front of the television like nothing was wrong, that hope faded. I waited until dinner was over. Then I asked them both to come to the dining table. I spread out the papers one by one. First the statement with the withdrawals. Then the letter about the trust rules. Last, the page with the false signature. I asked which of them had signed my name. My mother started crying. She said they only used the money to take care of me, to keep the family afloat. My father went cold and angry. He accused me of spying on them and caring more about money than about family. They said I was trying to shame them. When I mentioned the forged signature, my father shouted that I was not allowed to bring outsiders into family business. Finally, he pointed at my room and said if I could not respect them, I should pack my things and leave. I looked at him and felt calm. He had no idea he had given me exactly what I needed. That night, I texted my friend Lila and asked if her offer of a spare room was still open. She wrote back at once and told me to come whenever I was ready. I did not rush out that second. Instead, I decided to move quietly and carefully. For the next few days, I packed the few things my parents had not thrown away. I smiled politely at them, acted calmer, and let them believe I had accepted their version of the story. While I folded clothes and wrapped small items, I also searched drawers and cabinets for more papers. Whenever I found something connected to the trust or to big expenses, I took photos with my phone. At times, I pressed record during conversations. In one of them, my mother admitted they used the trust when times were hard. In another, my father said I should be grateful they had access to that money. They thought we were healing. My mother even hugged me in the kitchen and said families go through rough seasons. I hugged her back, my face against her shoulder, while my eyes stared past her. At dawn on a quiet morning, I slid the last box into my car trunk. On the kitchen counter, I left a note that simply said, I know everything now. Lila's apartment felt small and a bit messy, but to me it was fresh air. I carried my boxes up the stairs in slow trips. Each time I came back down, I felt the weight of my old house lift a little more. We set up a simple corner in her spare room. A narrow desk. My laptop. A folder that I labeled evidence in big letters. My childhood boxes were gone forever, but this time I would guard every new page. I picked up extra shifts at work so I could pay rent and save. At night, when the house was quiet, I opened my laptop and searched for information about trust law and forgery. The words were complex, but I forced myself to read. Finally, I emailed the attorney named in the letter. I told him who I was and what I had found. When we spoke on the phone, his voice changed as soon as I mentioned the forged signature. He asked me to send copies of everything. A few days later he called back and said this was not just a family fight. It could be fraud. My heart pounded as he asked if I was willing to take formal steps. I thought of the empty attic and my missing boxes. Then I said yes. The first legal letters went out the next week. They were simple requests for records, but to my parents they felt like attacks. I knew this because our family group chat exploded. My mother sent a long message about the pain of raising ungrateful children. She wrote that I was letting strangers judge my parents after all their sacrifices. My father added comments about how I had become cold and selfish since moving out. Some relatives quickly took their side. They sent sad face emojis and wrote things like parents are not perfect but we must honor them. Others stayed silent. I just watched for a while. Then I posted one message. I did not use names. I attached a blurred picture of the page with the rule about my consent and the false signature at the bottom. I wrote, "I am only asking for what my grandparents left for me. Nothing more." The chat went quiet. A few minutes later, my cousin Jerome sent me a private message. He said something similar had happened when his father died. Money meant for him vanished and he was told to borrow for school. He asked if we could talk in person. As I read his words, I realized this might not be only my story. Jerome and I met at a small coffee shop near the bus station. He looked nervous as he stirred sugar into his drink. When he finally spoke, his words came in a rush. He told me that after his father died, there was supposed to be a small insurance policy to help with his education. Instead, his mother and an uncle said there was a problem with the paperwork. The money never reached him. Later he heard them hint about a trip they took with unexpected funds. As we talked, we saw patterns. Older family members handled money in secret. Promises were made to children, but the adults treated those promises as optional. When anyone asked questions, they were called ungrateful or disrespectful. I thought about my parents throwing away my boxes. It felt less random now. If my past and my papers disappeared, then their version of events would be the only one. Jerome leaned forward and said maybe I was the first person with enough proof to break this cycle. His eyes were sad but hopeful. Walking back to Lila's place, I felt less alone. This was not just about numbers in a bank account. It was about a pattern of control that had covered our family for years. I was done playing my old role in it. Over the next few weeks, the pressure on my parents grew. The attorney sent formal requests for a full accounting of every withdrawal from the trust. My parents reacted by trying harder to control the story. They called relatives and neighbors, telling them I had turned against my own family. They said I was letting money destroy my values. Some people believed them, but small cracks began to show. One neighbor told me quietly that she remembered my parents boasting years ago about finding a clever way to pay for a vacation without touching their own savings. Another neighbor recalled hearing them argue about legal papers after my grandparents died. Each story lined up with the dates in the bank statement. I wrote everything down and asked those neighbors if they would be willing to confirm if needed. 2 of them agreed. One night my father called me, his voice full of anger. He said I was dragging the family name through the mud. I listened without interrupting. When he paused, I told him calmly that they ruined their own name when they chose lies over truth. There was a long silence. Then he hung up. A moment later, a short message popped up on my phone. It said, "We need to talk. Tonight." I agreed to meet at the house, though my stomach twisted as I walked up the old path. The living room looked the same, but the air felt different. My parents sat on the couch together, hands folded, faces tight. They said they wanted to find peace. They offered what they called a deal. If I stopped the legal process, they would gift me a small share of what was left in the trust. They said we could move on as a family and never speak of it again. I asked how much was left. They gave a number that sounded big, but I knew better. I pulled a folded printout from my bag and placed it on the table. It showed the real balance, which was far higher. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's face went pale. I told them I would not accept crumbs from what was mine. They insisted that parents deserve compensation for years of sacrifice. My father said love and care are worth something. I answered that love is not a bill to be paid from stolen gifts. I stood up. My mother begged me to think of what people would say. I told her the first people they lied to were the ones handling the trust. Then I walked out. Back at Lila's place, I learned that my parents had started saying worse things about me in our old community. A friend sent screenshots of comments my mother made online. She hinted that I was unstable, that I had fallen under bad influences. Fear rose in my chest. If they controlled the story, I could lose more than money. I could lose my name and my sense of reality again. I needed to tell my own version before their words covered everything. One evening I sat on the edge of my bed and opened the camera on my phone. I pressed record. I spoke slowly about growing up in a house where my things were controlled, my feelings brushed aside, and my future money used without my knowledge. I described the day I found the empty attic, the envelope behind the trash bin, and the trust letter inside. I did not name my parents, but anyone who listened could feel the weight of what happened. When I finished, my hands were trembling. I almost deleted the video. Instead, I uploaded it to a private account and shared it on a site where people post real experiences. Before going to sleep, I checked it once more. Only a few views. Then I put my phone face down and tried to rest. In the morning, I woke up to dozens of notifications. I blinked at the light of my phone as the numbers climbed. The video had been shared and reshared through the night. Comments flooded in. People wrote about college funds taken without permission, small inheritances stolen, and parents who treated their children's money as a reward for raising them. Some stories were even worse than mine. Others were small but still full of pain. Many comments called me brave, though they did not know my name. Others gave detailed advice. One user said they worked with victims of financial abuse and left a link to resources. Another said I should save every document and never meet my parents alone again. I read until my eyes hurt. For the first time, strangers believed me without asking me to soften the truth. Their words did not fix the damage, but they made me feel less strange. Late that night, after work, I checked the video again. A new direct message waited in my inbox from the person who said they were a financial abuse advocate. They offered to talk with me about a plan and warned me to be careful. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back one word. Yes. The advocate's name was Renee. We set up a video call for the weekend. When her face appeared on the screen, she smiled kindly but spoke in a very steady way. She asked me to start from the beginning. I told her everything. The boxes. The attic. The envelope by the trash. The trust fund. The forged signature. The group chat. Jerome's story. She listened without interrupting, sometimes taking notes. When I finished, she said quietly that what I was facing was not only betrayal. It was a form of financial abuse and emotional control. She said many young adults go through similar situations but never have proof. Together, we talked about options. Renee suggested that we push first for a full accounting and for the remaining money to be moved into an account only I could access, with a neutral trustee. She also said we should ask for a written acknowledgement of wrongdoing. If my parents refused, we could move to stronger action. She reminded me that the goal was not revenge but safety and respect. Her words helped me breathe more evenly. Before we ended the call, she said, "You are allowed to draw a line, even with parents. That line is what keeps you from becoming what hurt you." I thanked her and promised to follow through. Soon after that call, an invitation arrived for a memorial gathering in honor of my grandparents. It would be at a hall near our old church. Part of me wanted to stay away. Another part knew this might be the one place where the whole family would be together. I told my attorney about the event. He said it could be useful, as long as I stayed calm and safe. We made sure key documents were already sent so my parents could not claim ignorance. On the day of the memorial, I wore simple black clothes and carried the original envelope in my bag. When I arrived, my parents looked surprised. They quickly shifted into warm smiles and gave me hugs in front of everyone. During the formal part, people shared memories of my grandparents. I felt both love and grief as I listened. After the speeches, my father stood up again. He talked about how hard it is to be a parent and how some children forget what was done for them. His words were careful, but I heard the dig. Some relatives nodded, others looked away. I realized he was trying to turn the room against me. My hands tightened around the envelope. I knew it was time to decide whether to speak. My legs felt shaky as I stood, but my voice came out clear. I asked the room if I could say a few words about my grandparents. People turned in their seats. My parents stared at me, eyes wide. I walked to the front holding the same plain white envelope I had found behind the trash bin. I said my grandparents had left something for me. I told them this envelope had almost been thrown out with my childhood boxes. I opened it and took out the trust letter. Without raising my voice, I read the part that said any large withdrawal after I turned 18 needed my written consent. Then I held up the page with the false signature. I told the room that the last signature was supposed to be mine, but it was not my handwriting. I did not accuse anyone by name. I simply said the rules were clear and not followed. For a moment, no one moved. My parents stood frozen beside their chairs. My mother's lips parted. My father's hands clenched and unclenched. I walked to the table in front of them and placed the envelope there. I said quietly, "You knew this was never your money to use as you wished." The room stayed completely silent. They had nothing to hide behind now. The spell broke all at once. My aunt gasped. Someone at the back whispered something sharp. My mother began to sob loudly, saying they had no choice, that times were hard and they always meant to fix it. My father raised his voice, trying to drown her out and me as well. He said I was twisting things, that I never understood adult problems. But now he was not just yelling at me. He was arguing with relatives who asked their own questions. An uncle demanded to know why no one else was told about the trust. A cousin pointed at the paper and asked who really signed my name. The neat story of selfless parents taking care of a lazy child fell apart right there in front of everyone. My parents tried to grab the envelope, but the attorney I had invited stepped forward and took it instead. He introduced himself calmly and said he represented me in the matter of the trust. The room went quiet again. Hearing the word represented changed the mood. This was not a family drama to gossip about. It was a legal issue. The attorney asked my parents if they had a lawyer present. Their faces showed that they finally understood how serious this had become. Later that day, we sat in a small side room. It was just me, my parents, the attorney, and two older relatives chosen as witnesses. The air felt heavy, but for the first time I did not feel like the child in the room. The attorney laid out the choices in simple terms. The first option was for my parents to give a full accounting of every withdrawal, return remaining funds to a new account with only my name and the trustee, and sign a written acknowledgement that they had used the trust without my knowledge and that a false signature appeared on the document. That agreement would stay within the family. The second option was to let the matter move forward in court. That could mean deeper investigation and possible charges. No one raised their voice while he spoke. Even my father stayed quiet. My parents tried to argue that they deserved a share for raising me. They said parents invest years of their lives and deserve to be repaid. I listened and told them that love does not come with a price tag taken from stolen gifts. The attorney gave them a short deadline to decide. As we left the room, I felt shaky but also steady, like I had stepped onto solid ground after years of fog. In the end, my parents chose the first option. I knew it was not because they were suddenly sorry. It was because they feared what a public case might do to them. Still, the result mattered. The remaining money was moved into a new account in my name with the trustee. My parents signed the acknowledgement, their signatures neat and tight. Reading the words felt strange. They admitted they had used the trust without my consent and that a false signature appeared on one of the pages. On paper, the matter was settled. Inside me, it was more complicated. A few days later, we met one last time at the empty family house. Dust hung in the air. The attic above us stood hollow and silent. My parents tried to explain. They spoke about stress, medical bills, fear of losing the house, and the sense that the money would circle back to me. Their words circled around their own pain instead of mine. I listened. I did not raise my voice. When they were done, I told them I needed distance. I said I would not be visiting for a long time. My mother cried. My father looked tired. As I walked out the front door, I felt like I was leaving not just a house, but a role behind. The next months were quiet but full. I found a small apartment that I could afford with help from part of the restored funds. It was nothing fancy, but it was mine. I painted the walls a soft color and set up a corner as a studio. On one shelf, I placed the few drawings and photos that had survived my parents' cleanout. I also framed the flattened white envelope and hung it above my desk. It reminded me of how fast a life can be rewritten and how a small forgotten object can pull the truth back into the light. I used some of the money to pay off old debts that never should have been mine. Each payment felt like cutting another thread that tied me to the past. I continued therapy to untangle years of guilt and mixed messages. Meanwhile, the anonymous video kept spreading. People wrote to say my story helped them see their own families more clearly. Some called it a revenge tale. To me, it was something else. It was a record of me finally choosing myself. One evening Aunt Rosa sent me a short message. It said, "Your grandparents wanted you to be free. I think they would be proud." I sat at my desk and let myself believe her. On a calm Sunday morning, I sat at my desk and opened a new page. For the first time, I decided to tell the story under my real name. Not for the court or my parents, but for myself and for anyone who needed it. I wrote about the dusty attic and the missing boxes. I wrote about how it felt to have my history thrown away and then to find a thin envelope that changed everything. I wrote about the trust, the forged signature, the family gathering, and the moment my parents froze. I also wrote about smaller things. The first night at Lila's apartment when I could finally cry without being told I was dramatic. The quiet afternoons in my own place, when I made tea and listened to the sound of no one else's footsteps. I did not pretend that everything was healed. My relationship with my parents stayed distant and polite. Some relatives still thought I went too far. Even so, my life felt steady in a way it never had before. I ended the piece by looking up at the framed envelope and at a new box on the floor, filled with art and journals. This time I knew one thing for sure. No one would throw these away without my permission.